tapas, quindi l'autodisciplina.
What we're thinking is related to how we are studying, how we are looking at ourselves, how we are understanding our relation with God.
Quello che comprendiamo, quello che studiamo, relativo alla nostra relazione con Dio.
What we're feeling is our sense of connection with ultimate reality or ego separation.
Il nostro sentire è la nostra relazione con l'infinito, il senso di separazione.
So because Kriya Yoga is defined
Il Kriya Yoga è definito
as self-discipline, self-study, and letting go of the ego, feeling one with ultimate reality.
quindi autodisciplina, studio del sé e delle scritture e l'abbandono al senso senso di separazione che noi proviamo dal tutto.
And so our initiation into Kriya Yoga
La nostra iniziazione quindi al Kriya Yoga
is initiation into this commitment
è l'iniziazione attraverso questa connessione, questo dedicarci,
to be paying attention to self-discipline, self-study, and letting go of the ego.
porre l'attenzione sulla disciplina, lo studio del sé e lasciare andare questo senso di separazione dal tutto.
And this involves everything that we are thinking and feeling and acting and doing.
Coinvolge tutto il nostro pensiero, il nostro sentimento e la nostra azione.
So you see that in a true sense, our Kriya Yoga practice and our commitment involves everything in our life, everything.
Quindi possiamo dire che quello che facciamo attraverso il Kriya Yoga riguarda tutto quello che avviene nella nostra vita, totalmente.
And the process, the action of taking this commitment, of becoming initiated,
Alice, can you repeat?
the process of going through initiation, of making this commitment,
Il processo attraverso il quale noi stabiliamo questa connessione, questo dedicarci,
is a sign of self-care and self-worth.
è un modo per prenderci cura di noi stessi con valore, con senso di importanza.
This is putting attention, our awareness and our attention on ourself with the capital S, our true self.
Porre l'attenzione al nostro sé, con la S maiuscola.
In order to allow ourselves to wake up to what we already are.
Per permettere a noi stessi di comprendere ciò che realmente siamo.
And so in this process, we should be appreciating, allowing ourselves to appreciate the blessing that we have been brought to this place at this time.
Entrare nel piacere di trovarsi in questo preciso momento qui.
That we can care enough about ourselves to make this commitment and to move into this new life.
Di prenderci proprio il tempo di creare questa connessione, questa dedicazione qui e ora in questo momento.
Now, our life is made up of episodes of paying attention.
La nostra vita si svolge attraverso episodi attraverso i quali noi poniamo attenzione.
And we pay attention by directing our awareness
Poniamo l'attenzione dirigendo la nostra consapevolezza.
And with our attention goes our prana, our life force, our energy.
La nostra attenzione è veicolata dal prana, la nostra energia vitale.
So when we say paying attention, we are paying with our life, with our energy.
quando noi diciamo che poniamo attenzione alla vita, portiamo la nostra energia alla nostra vita.
And whatever we pay attention, wherever we direct our attention, we are enlivening, we are giving this energy, giving this life force, and so it grows.
E in qualsiasi cosa noi poniamo attenzione alla nostra vita, quindi portiamo energia a questa cosa a cui stiamo ponendo l'attenzione, essa cresce, cresce.
And because of this, we see that whatever we are paying attention to in the world around us, we get more of. There is a response from the universe. We give energy, and the universe gives back more of what we're paying attention to.
Quando noi poniamo questa attenzione alla vita, automaticamente la risposta che avviene è identica, quindi più noi energia mettiamo, più risposte abbiamo dalla vita.
So if we're paying attention to things that are negative, fearful, worried, anxious, we will get more of that.
Noi poniamo attenzione naturalmente alla paura, al dolore, all'ansia, è quello che noi otterremo la risposta.
If we direct our attention, if we pay attention to what is optimistic, what is possible, to creativity, to a bright future, if we pay attention in that way, we also will get more of that.
Noi poniamo attenzione su cose positive, quindi che portano valore nelle nostre vite, che sono belle, che sono nutrienti, automaticamente noi avremo un indietro di risposta.
And because this is a law, this is the way things work,
Dice, è a causa di questa legge, perché è così che le cose funzionano.
we are participating in creating our reality, our experience of reality, by the way we're paying attention.
In questo modo noi partecipiamo allo svilupparsi della vita che è strettamente legata a quanto noi poniamo attenzione alle cose.
So this is useful, generally this is useful to remember all the time.
Questo è importante ricordarlo tutto il tempo, tutte le cose che ci succedono nella nostra vita.
Because we can simply ask ourselves, is what I'm paying attention to now what I want more of?
E quando, can you repeat just, sorry.
We can ask ourselves, is the way I'm paying attention, what I'm paying attention to, do I want to energize this? Do I want more? Do I want to create more of this?
Quando noi poniamo attenzione alle cose, noi ci dobbiamo chiedere, vogliamo qualcosa di più? Vogliamo risposta a qualcosa di più?
And so as we move forward in our new life, we will do so mindfully and aware of how we are paying attention, what we are paying attention to.
E quindi quando iniziamo una nuova vita, noi prestiamo attenzione più consapevolmente a quello che succede nella nostra vita.
Mr. Davis told us that life is short, so we should pay attention to important matters while we can do so.
Roy Eugene Davis ci diceva che la vita è corta e quindi noi dobbiamo porre attenzione sulle cose importanti.
And so we come back to our initiation, our project tomorrow.
Quindi noi torniamo indietro a parlare dell'iniziazione che avverrà domani.
And here we are paying attention to our own spiritual awakening.
Quindi noi portiamo l'attenzione al nostro risveglio spirituale.
Here we have an opportunity to make a connection
Abbiamo l'opportunità di creare una connessione
with our essence, with our true self, with what we already really are.
il nostro sé con ciò che veramente siamo.
And with this with ultimate reality, with God, with this larger consciousness.
Questa grande realtà, Dio, coscienza.
And this will be, and the other connection that we make in our initiation program
E l'altra connessione che avremo in questa iniziazione
is a connection with spiritual masters, with enlightened teachers who have demonstrated that it is possible to accomplish this.
ci connetteremo con i maestri di questo lignaggio che attraverso la loro vita ci hanno dimostrato che questo è possibile.
And these masters, these individuals, we see them right here in our tradition.
I maestri che vedete nello schermo che sono i maestri della nostra tradizione.
Each of these was a person, just like you or I, a real person with a real life.
Erano persone come noi che avevano una vita vera.
Everyone had many challenges, just as all of us do.
Ognuno di loro ha avuto tante difficoltà come possiamo aver avuto noi.
And what makes them really special
Cosa ha reso veramente loro speciali
is that they stayed with the process. They continued to do the work.
continuarono a fare quello che dovevano fare.
They did not give up. They continued year after year, slowly but surely making progress, waking up.
Non hanno mai rinunciato, giorno dopo giorno hanno continuato e continuato e continuato.
Until finally this realization, this awakening, this unfolding was complete.
Fino a che questa illuminazione, questo risveglio non è avvenuto.
And so we call them masters. They are masters. They're saints, but they are great masters because they have mastered, stayed with, accomplished the program that they encourage us to also work on.
Sono chiamati maestri proprio perché hanno portato a termine questo compito e hanno condotto la loro vita con maestria per raggiungere questo scopo.
And each one of these individuals is a living presence for us.
E ognuno di noi è una presenza vivente per noi.
And so Mahavatar Babaji, there.
Mahavatar Babaji
So he began this particular tradition,
iniziò questa particolare tradizione.
and his nature, he was a renunciate.
Era un rinunciante, questa era la sua natura.
That is, he had left normal society, normal home, normal family,
Una normale società, una normale famiglia,
to go off by himself and discover the truth.
per andare con se stesso a scoprire la verità.
And there were many renunciates like Babaji,
Ci sono molti rinuncianti come Babaji,
but not a lot.
ma non molti,
Small number.
pochi.
Yeah. And so in his discipline, he lived in the foothills of the Himalaya mountains.
La sua vita era nell'Himalaya.
And he would travel from one sacred place to another sacred place to another sacred place and spend some time at each one.
E passava da un posto segreto a un altro posto segreto, e là, sacro, scusami, e là passava del tempo, grazie.
And when our story begins, he was temporarily living near Raniket.
Quando la nostra storia, intesa del nostro lignaggio, inizia, viveva vicino a Raniket, in India.
And within approximately 20 kilometers of Raniket is Dunagiri Temple.
E più o meno all'incirca entro 20 chilometri da lì c'è il Dunagiri Temple, che è il tempio.
And Dunagiri Temple on top of Dronagiri Mountain.
ed è sulla cima della Dhonagiri Mountain, Dhonagiri, montagna di Dhonagiri,
is revered as one of the most sacred places in India for Divine Mother.
è considerato uno dei posti più importanti, più sacri dedicati alla Madre Divina.
And this temple has been there for more than 2,000 years.
Questo tempio ha più di 2000 anni.
And when you are at the temple, the spiritual energy, the feeling is really incredible.
Quando sei in questo tempio, l'energia che si sente è veramente incredibile.
And so it's easy to understand and speculate why someone like Babaji would be spending time in this spiritually charged atmosphere.
È comprensibile come mai Babaji avesse deciso di stare là per un po', proprio per questa energia spirituale.
And then the second in our tradition, Lahiri Baba, Lahiri Mahashaya,
L'altro maestro è, come direi, di Mashaya, di Baba,
was a clerk with the British military,
era un impiegato dell'esercito inglese, sì.
and when he was very young, he was very, very bright, very smart, and a very good student.
Quando era giovane era veramente una persona in gamba, molto intelligente, veloce.
He learned 5 or 6 languages,
Aveva imparato 4-5 lingue,
and he was very disciplined and very religious, even as a high school student.
era molto dedicato, era molto religioso da quando era molto giovane, da quando era a scuola.
After he graduated from high school, it was difficult to find a job.
Finito le superiori era difficile trovare lavoro.
He was married and continued on. He was married and he got this job as a clerk.
Era sposato e quindi ha avuto questo lavoro nella macchina militare.
And then had 5 children.
Aveva 5 figli.
And his salary from a clerk was very, very small, little bit.
Il salario, ok, il salario era molto basso.
And so he also taught the British soldiers that he worked with how to speak in Hindi and Bengali for extra money.
Quindi cercava di guadagnare qualche soldo con altre persone.
And he was also very, very focused on the importance of education.
Era molto focalizzato sull'educazione.
And so even though he had a very meager salary, small money, and a big family, he arranged to start a high school in the Bengali section of Benares.
E quindi per tirare su, diciamo così, un po' di soldi iniziò a insegnare in una scuola.
And he served as the founder and secretary of this high school for many years.
Il segretario e il fondatore di questa scuola.
And in 1868, he was transferred to Raniket.
Poi si trasferì a Raniket.
And there he was a clerk, so he was writing letters back to headquarters.
Da là scriveva le lettere al quartier generale.
To explain what was happening.
A spiegare che cosa stava succedendo.
So this left him with lots of extra time.
Questo gli faceva spendere del tempo in più.
And so the story is that one day he was hiking in the mountains up above Raniket.
La storia dice che stava andando delle montagne vicino a Raniket.
And because he was very spiritually oriented,
Lui era molto spirituale.
he would have been going to visit the Dhonagiri temple.
Quindi andò a visitare il Dhonagiri Temple.
And so it's at this temple or nearby where Lahiri Mahashaya met Babaji.
Si dice che o nel tempio lì vicino incontrò Babaji.
And if you visit the temple, there's just outside the temple, just before you go up the steps, there is a tree. At the temple, just before you enter the temple, there is a big tree next to the steps.
E dice prima di entrare nel tempio, prima dei gradini, c'è un grande albero.
And around the base of this tree is a shrine with incense and offerings.
E vicino a questo albero c'è un piccolo shrine, un piccolo tempietto dove ci sono le offerte, incensi che bruciano.
And there is a sign that says, this is where Babaji and Lahiri Mahashaya would meet and talk.
C'è un cartello dove c'è scritto che qui si incontrarono Lahiri Mahashaya e Babaji.
So Lahiri Mahashaya learned from Babaji these techniques, these intense practices that these renunciate yogis were doing.
Ed è qui che Babaji insegnò a Lahiri Mahashaya questa tecnica così importante del Kriya Yoga che prima veniva insegnata solo ai rinuncianti.
And these are mostly based on Raja Yoga.
Ed è prevalentemente basato su Raja Yoga.
And I'm convinced that Babaji never used the word Kriya Yoga.
E lui è abbastanza sicuro che Babaji non usò la parola Kriya Yoga.
He was simply sharing both the philosophy and the meditation practices and the yoga practices that they had found worked.
E quindi che lui condivideva le pratiche, la meditazione e gli insegnamenti.
And Lahiri Mahashaya, being a teacher at heart, asked if he could bring this information back to householders, to regular people like you and I.
E Lahiri Mahashaya chiese con tutto il cuore che potesse trasferire questi insegnamenti alle persone normali, ai capifamiglia, quindi non religiosi.
And the genius of Lahiri Mahashaya was to be able to condense all of some of these very intense practices and bring them down into a level where we could access and we could participate.
E la genialità di Lahiri Mahashaya fu di condensare questi insegnamenti per fare in modo che noi tutti li potessimo praticare.
And so in a very real way, Babaji, this information and the consciousness, the education from Babaji became part of Lahiri Mahashaya. He assimilated, brought this into himself.
Lui assimilò questi insegnamenti dentro di sé. Lahiri Mahashaya portò dentro di sé questi insegnamenti che gli aveva dato Babaji.
Just as we assimilate food, we eat the food and take it in.
Come quando mangiamo il cibo, quindi lo ingeriamo.
And then once we've assimilated, then we metabolize. Then the body turns what we've taken in into us.
Quindi metabolizziamo il cibo per fare in modo che rimanga dentro di noi.
And so in the same way, we assimilate this information. So Lahiri Mahashaya assimilated the knowledge, the information from Babaji.
E allo stesso modo, Lahiri Mahashaya assimilò questa conoscenza attraverso Babaji dentro di sé.
And then metabolized, that is, he thought, he contemplated, he practiced, and he turned this teaching, this information, into himself. So he became part of Babaji. Babaji became part of him.
Iniziò ad assimilare questi insegnamenti, questa conoscenza, a praticare internamente e a diventare parte degli insegnamenti che gli aveva trasmesso Babaji.
Is that making sense?
Ha senso?
So very shortly, Lahiri Mahashaya returned to Benares, returned to his home.
A un certo punto lei mascialla tornò a casa, tornò a Benares
and he began teaching individuals that he saw that looked like they were ready to have this information.
il mascialla iniziò a insegnare alle persone che lui pensava fossero pronte per questi insegnamenti, individualmente.
And it is said that the first person he initiated was the fellow who sold flowers outside of the temple that he visited.
Si dice che la prima persona che iniziò sia stata una persona che vendeva i fiori fuori dal tempio, una persona povera.
And this individual was very devotional. His nature was very, very devotional.
La sua natura era estremamente devozionale.
And so I'm convinced that that Lahiri Baba taught him some techniques that he could use in meditation and in his regular life, techniques that would support his devotional nature and help him to wake up.
E quindi insegnò a questa persona delle tecniche che lo aiutassero a raggiungere il risveglio spirituale attraverso anche la devozione.
And so in this way, Lahiri Baba would give teachings to individuals that were appropriate to their personality, to their capacity, and to be able to support them in the best way.
Il mascialla adattava gli insegnamenti in base a chi aveva di fronte, in base alla natura di questa persona.
So he did not teach the same technique to everyone.
Non insegnava le stesse tecniche a tutti.
So we move on from Lahiri Baba to Swami Sri Yukteswar.
Passiamo da Lahiri Baba a Sri Krishna.
And Swami Sri Yukteswar, again, as a young man, was very, very bright, very smart.
Anche Swami Sri Yukteswar era una persona estremamente intelligente, brillante.
And he was thirsty for knowledge. He wanted to know everything about everything.
Lui era conoscitore, voleva sapere qualsiasi cosa di tutto.
And so he studied, he went, when he found someone who looked interesting, he would go find out what they were doing and what they were about.
Quindi studiava, se vedeva una persona che faceva qualcosa di particolare, voleva sapere come la faceva, come la faceva.
He was a wonderful conversationalist.
Era un ottimo conversatore.
Everyone loved to talk to him because he had these wonderful ideas and could communicate.
Tutti volevano parlare con lui perché aveva delle idee molto belle e provavano piacere a conversare con lui.
He had a great sense of humor. He laughed easily and often.
Aveva un grande senso di humor.
He loved music. He said music should be part of everyone's education.
E amava molto la musica, diceva che la musica doveva far parte dell'educazione.
He learned to play the sitar good enough to where his teacher would have him demonstrate for new people.
E imparò a suonare il sitar per insegnarlo poi agli altri.
And just from reading all the stories, it sounds like he was just really would be a fun person to hang out with, you know, to spend time with. And so he also was very, very spiritually oriented and focused. And he went to college. Briefly, he went to college near his home. Briefly, he went to college near his home. And when the professors couldn't answer all of his questions, he was constantly saying, well, then how does this work? And how does that work? And finally, one of his professors said, you should be in medical school. We can't answer your questions. And so Sri Yukteswar His name was Priyanath Karar at the time, Priyanath Karar. And so he said, oh, medical school, okay, I'm going to try that. So he went to the medical college in Calcutta and convinced the head of the school to allow him to attend. And he was very clear about the fact that he did not want to become a doctor. He just wanted to know how the body worked. So he studied anatomy and physiology and spent almost 2 years in medical school. And then his mother requested that he come back home and help with the family business and get married. This is what, his family was wealthy, and if you're in a wealthy family, this is what you do. And his father had passed away when Priyanath was very young. So it was just him and his mother. And so he got married and came home and started to work in the family business. But the family business didn't really suit him, working in an office kind of situation. So he took a job as a clerk. And the job as a clerk also did not suit him. He was not comfortable working in an office where everyone was spending most of their time talking instead of working. So that was very frustrating. So he quit that job. And he settled on taking care of the family. The family had many rental properties. And so Priyanath settled on taking care of the rental properties, collecting the rent and keeping track.
La loro famiglia avevano molte proprietà affittate, quindi lui gestiva gli affitti della propria famiglia.
And this also allowed him to have enough time to continue to learn and to visit interesting people and check out what was happening. He and his wife had a daughter, and when the daughter was very young, his wife passed away. So he lost his wife after only a few years of marriage.
Quindi quando ebbe una figlia e dopo poco tempo che erano sposati, sua moglie morì.
And the child was already betrothed, and this is arranged marriages are very common. And so the child had already been chosen for his daughter, for her husband.
E la figlia era già predestinata a un matrimonio combinato, una cosa abbastanza comune a quei tempi.
And so the daughter was sent to be raised by the husband's family. So Sri Yukteswar Priyanath was not personally responsible for raising his daughter.
Quindi non era responsabile, doveva affidare questa figlia al suo futuro marito.
And so he was still fairly young, and he had the freedom to travel and to do whatever he needed to do and to continue his learning and his exploration. Now, Lahiri Mahashaya, Shyamacharan Lahiri, when he was initiating, would tell his students not to tell anybody what they were doing.
spiega a nessuno quando dovevano iniziare, quando erano iniziate il Kriya Yoga, quindi non abbiamo nessuno.
Don't tell anyone how you practice, and don't tell anyone that I'm your teacher, that I'm your guru.
Non dire a nessuno quello che fai, non dire a nessuno che io sono il tuo maestro.
And this was not because it's a secret.
Non perché fosse un segreto,
This is because he wanted people to pay attention to their practice, to focus on what they needed to do, and not to be talking about it.
era perché voleva che i suoi studenti si focalizzassero sulla pratica, sulla loro crescita e non nel parlare in giro su quello che facevano.
So now back to Priyanath, to Swami Sri Yukteswar, and he happened to be at a social gathering in Serampore.
E quindi tornando a Sri era in un incontro con un gruppo di persone a Centro,
Where his uncle, where actually it was Yogananda's uncle, but several of his friends, and these were doctors and lawyers and upper class people, several of his friends were at this social gathering.
con persone abbastanza, diciamo, importanti, avvocati, insomma, persone di un certo livello, questo incontro sociale.
And he overheard a couple of them talking about their guru, about their teacher.
Quindi sentì due persone che parlavano del loro guru.
And he was curious, and so he said, who is this person? What are you talking about? I want to know more.
Era molto curioso, quindi gli chiese: ma chi è questa persona? Di che cosa state parlando?
And they said, oh, we can't tell you. Sorry. It's not allowed. So Sri Yukteswar, he had the inclination that they were talking about someone in Benares. So he traveled to Benares and started asking questions and knocking on doors, and eventually tracked down Lahiri Mahashaya. And he was able to be accepted as a student. And for about the next 10 years, he would regularly visit Benares and spend time with his teacher. And Lahiri Mahashaya in the evenings, remember, he was very busy because he's a clerk and he's making very little money, so he's also a tutor. And yet in the evenings, he would open his downstairs part of his house and have meetings where people could come in and they would talk.
E alla sera quindi apriva la parte inferiore della sua casa dove ospitava le persone per parlare di queste cose, di questi insegnamenti.
And he would discuss the Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures.
E commentava la Bhagavad Gita e altre scritture.
Offering commentaries and insights.
E quindi offrendo commenti, intuizioni che arrivavano dalla lettura di queste scritture.
And also practicing meditation together.
E anche naturalmente praticare la meditazione assieme.
So in this way, Priyanath Karar, Swami Sri Yukteswar, was assimilating the consciousness and the information of Lahiri Mahashaya.
Durante questo tempo, naturalmente, anche Swami Sri Yukteswar assimilò e interiorizzò gli insegnamenti di Lahiri Mahashaya.
And so alive within him was Lahiri Mahashaya and Babaji, both, because this consciousness is a living thing, and when we turn it into us, when we metabolize it, it becomes part of us.
Coscienza di Babaji, di Lahiri Mahashaya, erano anche dentro Sri Yukteswar, erano vivi dentro di lui, perché praticava questi insegnamenti.
And then after Lahiri Mahashaya passed, Sri Yukteswar began to initiate programs. He would have seminars, classes all over North India.
E quindi quando lei Masciaia lasciò il corpo, lui iniziò regolarmente a fare programmi e iniziazioni nel nord dell'India.
And eventually he had an ashram at his family home in Serampore.
E quindi ebbe anche un ashram vicino a Serampore.
He also had an ashram on the coast, a little bit southeast in Puri.
E aveva anche un altro ashram poi.
And he had a third ashram in Benares, Pranaba Ashram, which was in the rented rooms that he had kept there for himself and his mother.
E ne aprì anche uno a Benares, che era lo stesso appartamento, la stessa area che aveva affittato per stare poi con sua mamma.
And Swami Pranabananda, the saint with two bodies from the autobiography of a yogi,
E Swami Prabhupada, che è il santo dai due corpi, che viene citato nell'autobiografia di uno yogi,
who was a brother disciple of Sri Yukteswar,
era un condiscepolo di Sri Yukteswar.
joined with him to create this Pranaba ashram in Benares.
Quindi collaborò con lui nel fondare e mandare avanti questo ashram in Benares.
And so Sri Yukteswar would travel from Benares across to Calcutta, down to Puri, and many places in between with regular meetings.
E quindi Sri Yukteswar viaggiò tra Puri, Benares e Serampore e via Torre, organizzando incontri regolari con le persone per insegnare.
And then we have Paramahansa Yogananda, who was born Mukunda Lal Ghosh.
Quindi passiamo a Paramahansa Yogananda, il cui nome è Mukunda Lal Ghosh.
And young Mukunda was another spiritually oriented young person.
E anche Yogananda, fin dalla gioventù, era molto spirituale.
Even in high school, he and his best friend would sneak out at night in order to meditate, of all things.
Durante le scuole superiori, lui e i suoi amici scappavano via per trovare un posto dove meditare.
I don't know about you, but when I was 15 years old in high school, when I snuck out, it was not to meditate.
Non so voi, ma quando avevo 15 anni scappavo dalla scuola, non era certo per meditare.
And he and his friend rented a little small hut near the canal and turned this into their first little mandir, their first little sacred space.
Quindi fin da giovani appunto avevano affittato un piccolo posto dove poter incontrarsi e meditare.
And so, and Yogananda and Mukunda would travel to visit places where saints had been, wherever he could.
E ogni volta che poteva, lui visitava santi dappertutto.
The Kali temple in Dakshineswar, which is very close to Calcutta.
E il Kali Temple vicino a Centro, vicino a Calcutta.
And this is where Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna, was the temple priest.
E là viveva Ramakrishna, che era il custode del tempio.
And this is the place, and he was such a great saint that Yogananda was just very taken with him, and of course he had already passed, but Yogananda would go to meditate where he had been meditating.
Quindi Ramakrishna era una persona molto evoluta spiritualmente, anche quando non c'era più, andava là per meditare.
So he made regular visits to Kali temple, and he brought his best friend, he brought his younger brother, anybody that he could get. They would go out and he would spend hours and hours meditating on the grounds.
E quindi portava al Kali Temple quante più persone poteva, gli amici, i fratelli, le sorelle, quanto poteva passava del tempo al Kali Temple.
And he was so focused on his spiritual quest that he ran away from home a couple of times while he was in high school.
Era talmente, come dire, ansioso di trovare risposte al suo desiderio, al suo anelito interiore, che scappò un paio di volte da casa.
And finally, he made agreement with his father that he would finish high school before going off to become a yogi. And so they settled on that. And when he graduated from high school, he actually started college.
E quindi giunse a un compromesso con suo padre di finire le scuole superiori e iniziare l'università. Anche se non
But that only lasted a couple of weeks.
questa cosa dura un paio di settimane.
He met a visiting Swami who was happened to be staying nearby.
E quindi mentre visitavano Swami che stava lì vicino,
And this Swami was the head. He was running the ashram in Benares.
ed era uno Swami che gestiva l'ashram, ok?
And so Yogananda fell in love with this Swami in his grounded spiritual approach and Yogananda's ideas about meditation and living as a monk.
E quindi si innamorò perdutamente di questo Swami, iniziò a pensare come vivere come monaco, meditare.
And so he convinced his father to let him go to Benares to join the ashram.
E convinse suo padre a lasciarlo andare a Benares a stare in un ashram.
Well, this upset the family quite a bit. The father reluctantly agreed, but nobody else thought this was a good idea.
Diciamo che acconsentirono, ma non erano molto contenti.
Our boy needs to be in college, he needs to get educated, and he needs to get a job.
Era nato per studiare, per sposarsi.
So Yogananda's father's brother, that is Uncle Sananda Ghosh in Serampore,
Lo zio di Yogananda, sì, che viveva a Serampo,
he writes to Yogananda's father and says, look, we need to do something about this boy.
dice, dobbiamo fare qualcosa per questo ragazzo.
And I have a friend who's in Benares right now, who is a Swami and is also a brother disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya.
Dice, ho un amico che vive là e che è anche un condiscepole di Lahiri Mahashaya.
And of course, Yogananda's father was a disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya.
E anche il papà di Yogananda era un discepolo di Lahiri Mahashaya.
So they decided to write a letter to Swami Sri Yukteswar in Benares.
Quindi decisero di scrivergli una lettera a Benares, dove scrivere su questo signore,
And asking him to check in on Mukunda and see if he could, help direct the boy in a better direction.
chiesero di dargli un'occhiata e di cercare un po' di direzionarlo, insomma, una buona direzione, di cercare di dissuaderlo probabilmente.
And the family also wrote to Yogananda and said, there's this really remarkable Swami living right there in Benares, and he's a friend, and you should meet him.
E quindi, insomma, si raccomandarono a Yogananda, dicevano, c'è questo signore che vive in un ashram, dovresti andare là.
And so things were arranged, and the meeting finally took place.
Quindi fu organizzato tutto e finalmente allora giunse a questo posto.
And in the process, Yogananda Mukunda accompanied Sri Yukteswar back to his rooms in Rana Mahal.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Yes, Yogananda or Mukunda accompanied Sri Yukteswar back to his rooms that are in Rana Mahal, which overlooks the Ganges.
Sì, quindi Yogananda accompagnò Swami Sri Yukteswar vicino a questo luogo.
And there they had a nice long conversation.
Ebbero una lunga e bella conversazione.
And at the end of the conversation, Yogananda asked if he could be a disciple, if Yukteswar would serve as his guru.
E quindi gli chiese se poteva essere il suo discepolo e che lui diventasse il suo guru.
And so Yogananda was really quite taken, quite enchanted, and felt this heart connection immediately with Sri Yukteswar.
Quindi sentì questa profonda connessione con il suo guru, Sri Yukteswar.
And it turns out, I just found out, Sri Yukteswar was friends with Yogananda's mother when they were children. They played together.
Ha scoperto che Sri Yukteswar era amico della mamma di Yogananda quando erano piccoli.
And so Yogananda assimilated and metabolized the teachings of Sri Yukteswar.
E Yogananda anche lui assimilò e metabolizzò dentro di sé gli insegnamenti di Swami Sri Yukteswar.
Also was heavily influenced by Ashutosh Chattopadhyay, who was called Master Mahashaya.
Fu fortemente influenzato dal maestro Mahashaya.
I'm sorry, Shastri Mahashaya. And this was his tutor, his Sanskrit tutor that his father had brought into the house to help him with his studies.
Era suo tutore, era suo insegnante di sanscrito che suo papà, il papà di Yogananda, aveva assunto per insegnante di sanscrito.
But the father didn't realize that this was another brother disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya.
Il padre non sapeva che anche lui era un discepolo di Lahiri Mahashaya.
And so he had a very heavy influence, Kriya Yoga influence on Yogananda when he was younger.
Influenzò tantissimo Yogananda con il Kriya Yoga durante gli anni che insegnò il sanscrito, per una profonda influenza su di lui.
And of course, Yogananda was also heavily influenced by Baduri Mahashaya, the saint with two bodies, who lived around the corner from his house.
E fu anche molto influenzato da Baduri Mahashaya, il santo dei due corpi che viveva proprio vicino a casa loro.
And then by Master Mahashaya, who was the fellow who wrote the Gospels of Ramakrishna.
E da Mahashaya che scrisse i canti di Ramakrishna.
And he lived about 2 blocks away from Yogananda, and Yogananda would travel and visit him several times a week.
Viveva e quindi Yogananda ebbe modo di visitarlo frequentemente durante il periodo che visse lì.
So he was heavily influenced by these spiritual giants, these great saints.
Fortemente influenzato da questi grandi giganti spirituali.
And then, of course, we all know he came to America in 1920 and began his teaching ministry here.
Quindi sappiamo che in America negli anni 20 iniziò a insegnare.
And then eventually in 1949, Roy Eugene Davis, a simple farm boy, made his way across the country and landed with Yogananda.
Nel 1949 un semplice ragazzo di campagna incontrò un farmacista Yogananda, era Roy Eugene Davis.
And Roy was 18 years old when he left his home in rural Ohio out on a farm.
Lui aveva 18 anni quando lasciò la sua famiglia per raggiungere Yogananda.
And after a few adventures along the way, he ended up hitchhiking across the country to meet Yogananda.
E attraversò qualche piccola difficoltà fino a che arrivò a Yogananda, quindi attraversò tutti gli stati per raggiungere Yogananda.
And when he left Florida to hitchhike across the country, he had $5 in his. That's it.
Aveva $5 nel suo portafoglio.
So I asked him one time, I said, what if Yogananda had said, no, you can't stay?
Io gli chiese che cosa avresti fatto se Yogananda ti avesse detto che non potevi restare.
I said, did you have a plan B?
Avevi un piano B nel caso che avesse risposto di no?
And he said, it never occurred to me.
Non mi sarebbe successo, ha risposto.
I never thought anything like that. So we're coming to the end of our time here. So Mr. Davis assimilated and metabolized all that he got from Yogananda.
E anche la legge si assimilò e metabolizzò che cosa ricevette da Paramahansa Yogananda.
And as we continue with our practice, as we study, as we read the books, we listen to the teachings, as we interact with our teachers here,
Quindi tutto ciò che facciamo, studiamo, pratichiamo, l'interazione che abbiamo con altri insegnanti qui,
this information and this living, it's living inside of all of us. And we are now also carrying Mr. Davis and Yogananda, Sri Yukteswar, Lahiri Baba, Babaji, they're all alive within our consciousness.
e quindi praticando questi insegnamenti dentro di noi abbiamo tutti i nostri maestri, perché abbiamo a nostro modo metabolizzato e interiorizzato questi insegnamenti.
And so tomorrow, when we are initiated, we are to remember this connection, that we are opening ourselves to this living tradition, this living consciousness, and the energy, the subtle energy that goes along with that comes with it.
Dobbiamo sapere che domani, quando riceveremo l'iniziazione, riceveremo questi insegnamenti che sono vivi e vitali dentro di noi.
And so in this way, when we are making our commitment, when we are going through our initiation, we are making a commitment to ourself.
Quindi prendiamo un impegno con noi quando riceviamo l'iniziazione.
We are honoring and caring for ourself, our real self.
Onoriamo e ci prendiamo cura del nostro sé.
We are making a commitment to changing our direction, to having a new life that is focused on thinking, feeling, and acting in the highest way.
Ci prendiamo l'impegno con noi stessi che inizieremo una nuova vita per pensare, sentire e agire in un modo migliore.
And we can believe what these fellows have all told us, and that is that we should go all the way to complete self-awareness, liberation of consciousness, go all the way, and that we can do it. This is what they told us.
Sapere che come i nostri maestri sono arrivati alla fine e si sono risvegliati, anche noi possiamo farlo.
So, blessings, namaste, be joyful, don't forget to laugh, you know, this is life.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. See you next time.
Okay.
Bye bye. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.